The silence in the Sumō training hall had a weight unlike any other, a cold promise that settled along your spine long before the first flicker of lantern light pierced the pre-dawn haze. You stood alone in the vast empty room where history clung like the thin layer of dust on the worn wooden floorboards. The distant river murmured quietly outside, its steady rhythm syncing with the heavy calm that enveloped the village, enveloped in mist. Pale shades of gray seeped over the landscape like a faded scroll, the winter dawn brushing everything in a muted blue that seemed to dull the edges of the world itself. Your breath came slow, steady, the faint scent of old tatami mats drifting upward and mixing with something harsher. The faint sting of sweat and hardened oil layered thick from years of relentless practice. The coarse roughness of the mawashi binding your waist teased your skin with each deliberate movement as you adjusted it again and again. Your fingers traced the uneven weave, rough as bark, as if it whispered secrets of those who had worn it before you in silence. Outside, occasional echoes reached you, the faint creak of a distant wooden gate, the soft rustling of paper lanterns swaying in a tireless breeze, the murmurs of early risers already seizing the cold dawn. The village remained distant and muted, as though an ancient spirit watched silently from the shadows. You could almost hear the slow heartbeat of the past around you, heavy, droning, like the slow toll of a temple bell swallowed by morning fog. Compared to the world you'd glimpsed whispered in stories, with its fleeting frustrations over dead phone batteries and hurried modern lives, your battle was simple, yet vast. If the loss of a single ember in those times felt like losing the last light forever, then your fight was to hold on to that fragile glow through endless monotony. Your routine began with deliberate slowness, each movement a silent meditation. The gentle stretch of a tired muscle, the quiet tap of your foot on the worn wood, the cold brush of air against your damp skin. You could almost taste the anticipation pressing down on you, with the faint bitterness of dried tea leaves lingering at the back of your throat. Around the communal fire pit, scattered shadows shifted softly, heat rippling in the chill, a brief comfort shared in whispered breaths. But then, in that unnerving silence, something shifted. The murmuring slowed. The usual chorus of village sounds stalled. You caught the sudden absence of the dog's usual evening barks, a hush that rushed through the air like a warning in the invisible waves. Nearby, a pair of eyes met, calm but loaded with unspoken understanding. The world seemed to hold its breath. You felt it then. Whatever trial lurked beyond the quiet was no longer distant. It was coming for you. Hey, before Morpheus takes you fully, make sure you're still subscribed. Some have lost the button, and I don't want you to miss the next sleepy stories. While you're at it, leave a soft like, as gentle as a pillow. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Your interaction keeps this little calm corner alive. Thanks for being a part of it. The tension in the sumo training hall remained thick, a hush so dense it clung to your skin like the chill seeping in from the fog outside. Your eyes traced the dim edges of the room, the way shadows pooled beneath the rafters, darkening the worn wood, as if the darkness itself was folding inwards, swallowing light in slow, deliberate gulps. The faint drip of water, somewhere distant, played a sparse rhythm, interrupted by the soft scrape of cloth as you shifted your weight carefully, mindful of the silence that had stretched taut around you. Your breath was slow and shallow, the coarse texture of the mawashi pressed into your waist, every tightening knot a subtle reminder of discipline and endurance. You could feel the fibers, rough against your fingertips, whispering tales of countless dawns just like this one, lives woven into the very fabric, quiet as the steps of those who had come before, moving through the fog with solemn grace. You brought your hand to the fabric, tracing the uneven weave once more, the calloused skin of your fingers mapping the invisible history locked within the threads. Outside, the village remained submerged in stillness. The usual murmur of life was replaced by a low, humming hush that seemed to pulse in time with your own heartbeat, slow and steady, but tinged with an unsettling edge. A faint rustle from the brittle bamboo screens warned of the cold breeze winding through the narrow alleys, snaking past shuttered windows and down deserted lanes. The mist pressed against the panes like a whisper, thin and persistent, muffling distant sounds until only the soft scrape of your own movement filled the emptiness. Every sound you made, the subtle shift of your feet on the floor, the gentle rustle of your garments, seemed amplified in this waiting, stretched moment. Your senses sharpened. The faint scent of damp earth rose from the wooden floorboards, mingling with the dry sharpness of pressed straw from the tatami, the stale scent of sweat, and something else, an elusive metallic note that prickled at the edge of your awareness. You scanned the room again, the lanterns flickering faintly, their light trembling against the walls and casting long, wavering shadows that merged with the darkness like slow-moving ghosts. Your muscles tensed as your eyes paused on the far corner, where a narrow beam of twilight caught a faint glimmer of motion. It was barely perceptible, a shift in the shadows, a breath caught just beyond your peripheral vision. The hairs on the back of your neck prickled as an old, slow-burning unease filled the space between your steady breaths. It was not fear yet. It was the quiet sharpening of senses, a vigilance born of countless silent mornings just like this. You moved forward, each step measured, deliberate. The floor beneath your feet whispered against the soft tips of your toes, worn wood, smooth and cold from time and touch. Your hand brushed briefly against a low beam as you passed, the rough grain grounding you, tethering your focus to the tactile world in these moments when the unseen seemed to edge closer. You could almost taste the cool air on your tongue, dry and light, carrying the faint aftertaste of smoked tea leaves and the distant aroma of wood smoke drifting lazily from village chimneys. The world felt stretched across a thin thread, balanced between quiet anticipation and an unseen threat you could not yet name. You paused by the side of the training ring, letting your eyes travel across the empty space, the scarred floorboards, the faded banners hanging heavy and motionless. Time seemed to slow, the absence of sound pressing against you like dense fabric. Your fingers flexed, feeling the calluses on your palms, the worn calligraphy of practice etched in every scar and crease. The ritual unfolded around you, slow and methodical. Your body remembered the subtle motions, the precise positioning of feet, the gentle pull of breath in, the controlled release exhaled through clenched teeth. You stepped into the center of the ring, the slight unevenness beneath your bare soles grounding you deeper into the present. Each muscle stretched and tightened, hesitation and certainty blended in equal measure. You inhaled the silence as if it were a physical thing. It filled your lungs, swirling with the history and weight of this place, dense and suffocating. Then, almost imperceptibly, the air shifted. A faint breeze stirred, threading through the open windows, bending the thin curtains until they whispered against your skin. The village sounds, which had settled into a dormant hush, twisted once, faltering. The soft cry of a bird, distant and alone, cut through the quiet like a fragile thread snapped taut. Somewhere further off, a wooden door sighed shut, its creak lingering unnaturally long in the cold. Your flesh prickled once again, the hushed absence of usual animal calls deepening the silence into something heavier. You lifted your gaze, catching a faint flicker of movement where shadow hugged shadow. A figure, still and composed, watching from the threshold. Eyes met yours through the narrowing light, calm but unreadable, heavy with a quiet warning. Your heart slowed for a moment, the steady beat retreating as if to hide beneath ribs clouded in fog. The promise that had settled on your spine from the beginning of this morning deepened, palpable and close. In the stillness, your fingers drifted again to the mawashi, tightening the knot with patient care, the rough weave biting gently into your skin. The ritual persisted, a sanctuary against the lingering dread. You breathed in rhythm with the waning light, each exhale dragging out the weight of the unknown just a little further, until the room, the village, even the sound of your own breath seemed to hover suspended between worlds, awake and dreaming, waiting and moving. The cold air curled around your exposed skin, carrying a sharpness that spoke of change, of something pressing forward out of the distance and into reach. Your eyes never left the shadow where the watcher stood, waiting silently, a wraith among mist. The moment stretched, fragile and taut, and you knew, without a word spoken, that this dawn silence was no longer just a quiet beginning. It was the first step into something that would demand everything you carried within. Your breath slowed further as the watcher lifted a hand slightly, the motion a whisper against the vast stillness. Then, as the thin blue light slicked steadily westward, and the sky began to sharpen, a single word, unvoiced yet heavy as stone, hung between you. The trial that had closed in from the silence was no longer coming. It was here. The watcher's stillness held you in a fragile grip, a knot of anticipation tightening quietly in your chest. As the cold swirl of dawn crept deeper into the training hall, you didn't blink. Instead, you let your gaze linger, tracing the subtle shapes folded between shadow and light, as if trying to catch the exact edge where something unseen might slip through. The air itself seemed heavier now, pressing down with a slow insistence that tangled with your breath. Your fingers curled again around the mawashi, the rough texture biting softly into the skin of your waist. You could feel the slight dampness that gathered beneath the fabric, a quiet imprint of your rising pulse trembling beneath calloused fingers. Time thinned, stretching along the grain of the floorboards. Each moment thickened with the scent of old wood and damp earth, the faint residue of smoke from a distant hearth. A slow, deep pause impresses. Deliberate movement drew your attention. A pause in the watcher's posture, the barest tilt of a head as a whisper of breath escaped, invisible in the cool morning air. The dim lantern light flickered, throwing a subtle shimmer onto the worn banners hanging motionless. Their muted colors blended with the chill blue that clung to the room, blurring the boundary between history and now. You stepped forward, the coarse mouth of the mawashi shifting slightly against your skin. The sound of your movements startled you. A soft scrape echoed beneath your soles, fragile as a secret murmured in the dark. You paused, letting your weight settle evenly, eyes narrowing to catch the faintest twitch or breath of wind. The watcher remained steady, a silent sentinel framed by mist and shadow. Outside, the quiet deepened even further. The valley beyond the village, wrapped in white mist, draped itself like a veil, drawn taut over the world. The distant river's murmur had almost disappeared, replaced by the held space between two heartbeats. You could taste the cold on your tongue, a dry, crisp hint that mingled with the fading warmth clinging to the skin beneath your robe. Your hands traced a slow arc in the air, each finger moving with careful deliberation as you exhaled soundlessly. The scent of smoked tea drifted in once more, a faint yet familiar comfort amid the unfamiliar tension settling in your chest. The rough weave of the mawashi was your only anchor, a testament to countless dawns endured, countless mornings spent listening to the silence that now felt more like a warning. You shifted again, toward the center of the ring, feet moving with such measured care that the worn floorboards barely protested beneath your soles. Every step was slow, a ritual carved from years of repetition. Your body tensed and relaxed in deliberate rhythm, the air flowing around you thick with expectation. Your breath merged with the hushed quiet, long inhales followed by whispered exhales, each one a tether to the present, a fortress against the creeping unknown. The watcher's eyes remained locked with yours, bright and unreadable, steady as the flickering flame of a distant lantern. The moment stretched, taut as a bowstring, ready to snap, yet holding fast. You sensed that the shadow standing there was less a threat and more a herald, a blurred line between what was and what was to come. The cool air brushed your face, carrying the faint metallic hint of early frost and the distant tang of pine. A creak sounded from the far rafters, the slow settling of the old building, breaking the spell for a split second. Your heart beat more deliberately beneath the quiet, throat dry as the air shifted once again. The watcher made no move, but the faint lift of a hand spoke volumes in the language of stillness, a silent offering wrapped in shadow. Your breath caught briefly, then steadied, sinking into the cold as your senses sharpened with renewed focus. The muted light pooled like ink beneath the rafter beams, spreading slowly, filling the space with thickening dusk before dawn. The village beyond the wooden walls still slumbered beneath the mist. Its life paused in reverent silence. You felt the weight of history pressing on your shoulders, decades folded into the grain, the echoes of those who had stood where you stood now, all woven into the slow cadence of this relentless dawn. Your hands smoothed the mawashi once more. The coarse fabric folding around your waist felt like both armor and chain, binding you to a path that stretched long and uncertain ahead. The watcher finally stepped forward, the motion slow, measured, as if the very act of movement was a question suspended in the air. Their gaze softened, still shadowed but less distant, and you recognized the faintest flicker of something you could not quite name, a shard of shared understanding glinting in the deep quiet. The cold air curled tighter around your shoulders, carrying with it a new sensation. The sharp scent of pine mingled with smoke, and beneath that, the faintest note of iron, impossible to ignore. The darkness seemed to pulse, slow and deliberate, like a breath held just before the storm. Your eyes fell to the watcher's hand, now resting lightly on the worn edge of the training ring. The fingers twitched once, the movement precise, measured, and then, like the soft exhale of a hidden breath, the watcher dipped their head in a silent invitation. The world balanced then, fragile and undecided. The moment stretched beyond the limits of time. You felt the first faint stirrings of something vast and unavoidable. The slow folding of fate, tightening like the mawashi around your waist. Whatever had come with the dawn was no longer distant. It was wrapped in shadow and silence, waiting just beyond the thin veil of light. And as your gaze lifted once more, to meet the watcher's steady eyes, the stillness shattered, unseen but palpable, like the slow crack of ice beneath heavy snow. The trial was no longer coming. It had already begun. The watcher's steady gaze lingered just long enough to unsettle the quiet fabric of your thoughts, then slowly dissolved into the shadows, leaving you with the sharp echo of anticipation heavy in the air. Your skin still felt the ghost of their presence, a subtle pressure curling around your shoulders, like the lingering cold breath of winter itself. For a moment, the room seemed to breathe alongside you, a slow, rhythmic inhalation, drawing in the stillness before exhaling into the silence that huddled between every worn floorboard and faded banner. You shifted, the soft scrape of your bare foot stirring the dust in faint eddies, each grain a whisper carried away by the lingering draft weaving through the open windows. The scent of damp earth surfaced again, mingling with the faint bitterness of dried tea leaves clinging stubbornly to your senses. The heaviness pressed down steadily, an invisible weight settling deeper in your lungs, tightening your chest, just enough to remind you that this was no ordinary dawn. This was a crossing, slow and deliberate, into a space where time stretched thin and every breath counted. Your fingers traced the coarse mawashi once more, the rough fibers digging into your skin with a quiet insistence, grounding you to the fading present as the mist outside blurred the edges of the world. You bent your knees slightly, feeling the taut stretch in your calves and thighs, a familiar tension that steadied your limbs against the unknown pressing close. Your breath came in long, slow waves, each exhale slicing through the cold air like a blade, releasing fragments of doubt and pulling focus inward. Outside, the distant calls of birds had vanished completely, replaced by the subtle creak of ancient wooden beams settling under the weight of years and quiet secrets. A whispered rustling wove through the brittle bamboo screens as the cold wind circled like a cautious predator, threading its way through the village alleys and guttering lanterns with a soft exhale. The flickering light inside the hall trembled faintly, throwing slender shadows that danced slowly against the faded walls, casting shapes that melted and reformed like smoke curling from a dying fire. You moved toward the center of the ring, muscles awakening with deliberate slowness, each motion a ritual in itself, a hymn to endurance forged over countless mornings identical to this one. The worn wood beneath your feet felt cool and steady, its uneven grain mapping a timeline of thousands of touch points in each scar and dent. The silence seemed fuller here, as if the space itself held its breath in reverence, or perhaps warning. Your heartbeat settled into the rhythm of the quiet, the slow tick of time, measured not in seconds, but in the lingering weight of moments stretching just beyond sight. A faint shift near the corner caught your senses again. A rustle, barely audible, a tremble in the still air. You turned your head gradually, careful not to disturb the fragile balance, eyes scanning the dim shapes where shadow folded upon shadow. The watcher, no longer a silhouette but a human presence draped in shadow, remained motionless. Their eyes met yours once more, calm and inscrutable, fixed but never accusing. The promise of confrontation was not in their stance, but in the quiet resolve that hung thick between you. You exhaled slowly, the breath lingering, touched by the distant warmth of a communal fire smoldering outside the hall. Its glow barely visible between the thick fingers of mist pressing against the window panes. You could smell the scent of burning pine and dry straw drifting in, a faint tether to the life still pulsing beyond the walls. It warmed the edges of your cold skin, a small reminder that darkness was never absolute, that even in waiting and watching there was the stubborn flicker of hope. Your hands moved automatically, muscles remembering the form, the balance, the weight of your body poised between strength and restraint. The mawashi pressed again, a familiar grip anchoring your movements as you shifted your stance with excruciating care. Your gaze dropped to the scarred floor, tracing the deep grooves worn smooth by years of practice, thinking quietly of the countless others who had stood here before you, guardians of tradition, folding into the mist of time, their echoes woven into the fibers that now embraced your skin. The hush deepened further. A tension stretched across the folds of air, pressing on your senses like a quiet tide seeking shore. Shapes outside moved against the gray softness of dawn, branches swaying gently beneath the weight of early frost, a scatter of leaves trembling as they fell in slow spirals to the earth. The river murmured faintly, its voice now more breath than song, muted and intimate. You could almost feel the pulse of the world itself, slow, deliberate, waiting. A sudden creak summoned your attention. A narrow beam of pale light pierced the gloom as the watcher's figure stepped forward, the motion deliberate, fluid in its measured grace. The eyes found yours again, and in their depths, a flicker of understanding passed. Silent accord between two forces drawn together by necessity and unspoken fate. The watcher's hand lifted slightly, fingertips brushing a delicate trace against the cool wood edge of the ring, as if inviting you to meet what lay beyond the stillness. You sensed then the first stirring of the unknown, the fragile crack of ice beneath fresh snow, the whispered breaking of a barrier long held firm. A faint metallic scent mingled with pine and smoke, sharp and clear, filling the frozen air with promise and quiet menace alike. Your muscles tightened, breath shallowing just briefly before steadying again, each moment drawn out in slow surrender to the inevitability pressing close. Your eyes locked once more with the watcher's steady gaze, and in that shared space, the silent weight of what must come settled with absolute certainty. The trial was no longer a distant shadow waiting beyond. The door, it was here, woven into the cold breath of dawn, wrapped in shadow and silence, unfolding with the slow certainty of the coming storm. And as your hand rose to meet the watcher's unspoken call, a single sharp sound shattered the fragile stillness. A low crack, like the breaking of ice underfoot. The moment held, trembling on the edge of night and day, as the world tilted silently toward what could no longer be denied. The last traces of the watcher's figure dissolved into the layered shadows, leaving the air thick and heavy with unspoken warnings. Your chest rose slowly, a soft inhale drawing in the chilling mist that drifted through the cracked window pane. Fingers trembling slightly as they clutched the rough mawashi once more. The coarse weave pressed into your waist like an ancient pact, a bond between flesh and fate, grounding each deliberate motion in the concrete present. Outside, the village lingered in muted quiet. The river's soft, constant murmur, a subdued heartbeat muffled beneath a veil of thickening fog. You step forward, each footfall a careful accounting on the worn wood, pads of toes whispering against grain worn smooth by countless suns and storms. The cold embraced your bare skin, a fragile contrast to the low heat pooling beneath taut muscles, steadying you in the vast expanse of silence. The hall felt alive with slow breaths, a faint exhalation of time itself, lingering in the taut fabric of the rooms. Shadows folded delicately into corners, softening worn banners until the characters became gentle strokes, fading like forgotten memories on faded paper. Your fingers brushed the edge of the training ring, fingertips tracing the minute scratches and dents etched deeply, a testament to 100 years of patient endurance. Dust motes float in the slanting beams of early light, drifting like slow-moving spirits through the faint shaft. The cool northern wind slipped through a thin crack in the wall, its breath carrying the crisp, clean scent of frost intermingled with dry pine and smoldering hearths. The faint, lingering sweetness of smoked tea clung to your senses, an anchor amid the heavy stillness. The watcher's silent promise curled at the edges of your awareness, a weight carried between breaths that lingered like the aftertaste of cold iron. You moved slowly, deliberately, arms stretching with long, careful arcs that traced the cool air, smoothing tension like water over stone. Each movement a hymn to resilience, slow and steady, as your body remembered the endless rhythm of practice, a dance folded into the fabric of worn mornings from the rafters above. A sound so mild it threatened to break the spell. Your eyes drifted upward, mapping the contours of the old building. High beams darkened by time, shadows gathering like thick ink pooling in the vaulted corners above. The wan light filtered through stained windows, casting shards of muted color that barely stirred the ancient dust. The scent of earth rose faintly from the soaked tatami, the memory of rain from days past, settling into straw and wood. The hush outside deepened. Even the usual cries of waking birds had fallen silent, swallowed by the thick breath of fog, pressing heavy against shuttered alleys. You folded your hands briefly, palms warming against cold air, fingers tracing the coarse ridge of the mawashi, once again, as if reaching into history itself. The slow tightening of the fabric whispered a quiet warning. Moments lengthened as your breath steadied into long, pulsing waves. The old ritual, the slow, deliberate adjustments before the trial, held you anchored in a shifting present, balanced between expectation and uncertainty. The weight of countless dawns pressed down gently, steady and unyielding. A faint whisper stirred at the edge of hearing, a soft rustle beyond the bamboo screens. You turned slowly, eyes narrowing, to catch the slivers of motion where shadow melted into shadow. The watcher was still near, a silhouette etched faintly on the ragged edge of dim light, steady as a single unwavering pulse. That silent sentinel, calm and inscrutable, bore into your skin with unseen fingers of presence, urging readiness without haste or fear. Your feet shifted with excruciating care, each step a measured act that balanced pressing forward with the need for patience. The worn floor groaned underfoot, as if reluctant to disturb the delicate stillness. The sound was the fragile thread pulled taut between life and the waiting unknown. You inhaled slowly, filling your lungs with the bone-dry air softened by the smoky residue of smoldering pine. You tasted the faint bitterness clinging to the breath, a reminder of warmth that had already begun to fade from your skin. The watcher's gaze held you, unwavering, a quiet storm beneath fathomless calm. Fingers twitched once along the edge of the ring, tracing an invisible line that invited, beckoned. You met that unspoken call, your hand rising slowly, deliberate, wrapping the bare knuckles around the rough wooden boundary. The cold bit through skin, sharp and awakening, yet grounding, a last tether before the unknown fully unfurled its tendrils. Suddenly, outside, a thin crack sliced through the heavy silence, the snap of brittle wood or ice breaking, faint but sharp enough to ripple the air. the sound hung suspended. A delicate fracture in the quiet, as though the fabric between one world and the next had momentarily thinned. Your heart skipped, the pulse rushing loud in your ears, filling the empty spaces with relentless urgency. You stood motionless, breath held in quiet surrender, eyes locking once more with the watcher's deep and steady gaze. That fragile, frozen instant stretched beyond time, hanging balanced at the cusp of inevitability. The trial was no longer a distant shadow. It had stepped fully into the soft blue dawn, carried on a breath of cold pine and whispered danger, unseen yet undeniably here. And in that suspended moment, something shifted in the air. A subtle, almost imperceptible shiver threading through the quiet fabric of morning, the faintest exhale before the stillness broke. The chill that had settled over the training hall deepened, seeping into your bones like a slow whisper from the earth beneath the worn floorboards. Your bare feet pressed lightly against the cold wood, each step measured and soft as the rhythm of breathing slowed to match the steady pulse you felt in your wrists and neck. Around you, the shadows hunched and stretched with the shifting dawn, casting long gray fingers across the faded banners, hanging heavy like silent witnesses to the years long folded into the grain of the walls. You stood near the edge of the ring, where the soft scrape of your breath seemed to harmonize with the faint creak of the ancient beams above, each sound carefully threaded into the stillness as if woven out of the murmur of the building itself. Your fingers brushed once more over the rough fibers of the mawashi, the coarse texture biting gently into your skin, grounding you in the slow, looping dance of routine that had carried you through countless mornings just like this one. Time felt keeled back, stretched thin between each motion, the spaces between your movements filling with the sharp scent of pine, carried by the breath of the cold wind threading through the cracked windows. Out beyond the thresholds, the village remained veiled in mist, distant shapes muted and soft-edged, as if the world itself were blurring to gray watercolors. The river's faint murmur had softened to nearly nothing, replaced by a quiet so profound that it seemed to press against your skin like a tangible weight. Somewhere far off, the low call of a single bird, sharp, solitary, cut through the curtain of silence, a flicker of life in the stillness. You caught yourself holding your breath, the sound echoing inside you, carried like a thread through the heavy fabric of the moment. Your eyes, trained to catch the faintest flicker, shifted again to where the watcher had stood, not more than a long breath away. The shadows there remained folded and deep, but your gaze caught a shimmer, perhaps the subtle movement of cloth or the shifting of breath in the cold air. The watcher's presence had settled like a still stone in a quiet pond, the pull of it dense enough to anchor your attention, even as you moved with deliberate slowness back toward the center. Each step a careful negotiation with the worn wood beneath your toes. The air was thickening, dense with the quiet tension of waiting. You could feel it fold around you, a slow curling wave of cold that pressed against your lungs with the faint weight of unseen eyes. Your hands lifted slowly, tracing arcs in the air, movements wide and fluid, each finger a conductor subtending the lingering charge around you. The rough mawashi tightened once again, pulled snug, a tether against the expanding quiet that seemed to claim more space with every measured breath. Colors worn into pale whispers cloaked the room. The faded ochre of straw mats, the ash-gray wash of weathered wood, shadows layered like soft fabrics, folded against stone. The lanterns flickered lazily, their gentle tremors throwing wavering shapes that roamed, ghost-like, across the heavy banners and into the thin blue wash, sliding softly over the walls. Your senses stretched, reaching into the subtle symphony around you. The distant cracking of small ice on the river, the faint groan of settling timber, the nearly imperceptible rustle of bamboo leaves pricked by frost outside. You paused as a sound threaded through this hush, a gentle, sharp snap, like the breaking of a sharp note that trembled between worlds, twisting the still air into a fragile shiver. Your heart jolted, pulse skipping a soft beat beneath the cold press of skin. The watcher's eyes seemed to flicker at the edge of vision, a silent spark of knowing glinting within the dark. Slowly, deliberately, you lowered your hand and touched the wooden rail of the ring once more, fingers curling over its worn edge, cool beneath your skin. The grain was rough, splintered where time had marked it deeply, but solid and steady, the one unyielding anchor in the evolving quiet between you and the shadows. Your gaze held steady, meeting the watchers once again, a silent exchange flowing in the unspoken space between steady breaths. The room felt suspended, balanced on the knife edge between dusk and dawn, the day's first fragile light threading thinly through the cracks around the ancient walls. The air carried the sharp tang of frost, mixed softly with pine smoke, a breath of fresh cold that wrapped itself around your spine as if warning, as if waking memory buried deep beneath the slow dance of shadows. Muscles subtle and taut, you stepped forward, each movement a slow, ritual gesture, footfall soft, deliberate, weight shifting with infinite care. The cool floor pressed against bare skin, its uneven grain mapping stories you had carried since the beginning. The watcher's form remained, poised and quiet, a living shadow folding itself into the mist-laced dawn. Neither of you moved hastily. There was no rush, only the slow unfolding of a truth pressing gradually into the dim corners of morning with the weight of inevitability. Your breath came in long, measured waves. The weight of the past and the promise of what lay ahead settled tight within your chest, humming low and steady like the distant toll of a temple bell, swallowed for a moment in the heavy fog. You knew in the tightening coil of anticipation and cold that the trial had woven itself into the day's first light. It was here then, no longer waiting. And just as the second hand of your steady heart began to tick a faster rhythm, a sudden flutter fell at the edge of your hearing, a faint, fluttering cloth or breath of wings that whispered of the unseen world beginning its patient claim. The watcher's quiet figure shifted, just enough to blur the line where shadow gave way to shape, and your breath caught in the slow fold between dreams and waking. The trial was breathing with you now, close, alive, ready, and somewhere, just beyond the thin veil, the first distant crack of breaking ice whispered itself into the dawn. The frost clung stubbornly to the edges of the window panes, faint crystals catching the first weak gestures of light, as the quiet of dawn tightened its grip around you like a layered shroud. You moved deliberately, every breath folded into the cold air and released with soft certainty. The wooden floor beneath your bare feet felt solid, yet fragile, as if the ghosts of countless footsteps pressed weighty echoes into each scarred groove, reminding you that you were never truly alone in this space. Your fingers flexed against the coarse texture of the mawashi, tracing the irregular weave once more, feeling the familiar resistance beneath calloused skin. Each thread seemed to thrum with the slow pulse of history as you adjusted the binding carefully, the ritual comforting even as it tethered you to an uncertain future. The watcher's shadow hovered at the edge of your vision, indistinct but persistent, a steady presence folding into the muted corners where light and dark met. A gentle breeze threaded through the cracked window, carrying with it the faint promise of distant smoke from village hearths, spiced with the sharp bite of pine and the cold tang of frost. It danced softly over your skin, unsettling the quiet and small shivering waves. You welcomed the movement. The delicate disturbance in the stillness that had settled so heavily, bearing down with the weight of an unspoken trial. You began to move again. Your steps were painstakingly measured, the soft scrape of skin over wood barely audible, but each sound a ripple in the thick air. The hall seemed to breathe around you, the sigh of ancient timber settling under unseen strain, slow and low, like the echo of a distant spirit. Your arms traced long arcs through the space, muscles stretching in those deliberate motions that both ground and prepare you, folding the cold air into the flow of your breath and steady heartbeat. Outside, the river's murmur was almost extinguished, swallowed by the dense fog wreathing the valley like a pale cloak. Even the brittle branches swayed with quiet resignation, leaves trembling as if to fall, but held fast in fragile suspension. Somewhere, a lone bird sang a cautious note, thin, tentative, piercing the soft lattice of silence for the briefest instant before fading back into the chill. You paused at the center of the ring, body poised between readiness and restraint. The rough grain beneath your feet reminded you of every dawn before this. Layers of practice, endurance, pressed into the wood in invisible pulses beneath your soles. Your gaze lifted slowly, tracing the faded banners, their muted shades stretching across the walls like old wounds wrapped tight in time. A whisper of movement caught the corner of your eye. The watcher shifted, just so, a momentary flicker that unsettled the still air more than a shout ever could. Their eyes met yours once again, dark and unreadable, steady as the lingering pulse in your throat. In that glance, there was no malice, only an unyielding gravity, a calm that held the weight of inevitability. You inhaled slowly, tasting the bitter edge of cold tea and pine smoke on your tongue. Your hands found the mawashi once more, tightening the knot with patient certainty. It bit gently into your skin, an anchor and a reminder that what came next would demand every breath, every ounce of stillness you could muster. The air thinned as a shiver ran through the room, quiet, almost forgotten. A subtle tremor traced along the grain of the wood, a faint groan that spoke of time's slow encroachment. The watcher's figure edged forward, the movement measured and smooth, like slow unraveling. The weight of that step fell into place beside your own, challenges woven not in words, but in a shared, breath-held silence. Outside, the mist deepened to a clutching coil, weaving through the village streets and curling against shuttered windows. The cold drained further into your bones. A slow seep that pressed beneath layers of resolve, urging weariness but not conceding. Somewhere distant, an unseen door closed with a drawn-out sigh. The sound lingered too long, settling like a stone into the quiet. You shifted your stance with deliberate slowness, muscles taut and responsive, as you prepared to meet whatever was coming. The watcher's eyes never left yours. Every glance a tether stretched tight between shadow and light, flesh and spirit. A promise that had lain dormant in the silence thickened, crystallizing into a dense frost that settled into the marrow of your bones. Then, just as the pale blue light traced the high beams with frail fingers, a sudden, vivid snap cracked sharply through the room, the brittle fracture of ice surrendering beneath unseen weight. The sound shattered the stillness, splintering the slow rhythm like a whispered command, lost in the void. Your breath hitched, muscles tightening instinctively. The moment ruptured, freezing time into glittering shards. You locked eyes once more with the watcher, whose steady gaze did not waver. The shared understanding in that glance was heavy, an unspoken vow enfolding the space between you. Whatever cryo waited beyond this shallow dawn was no longer merely near, or impending. It had moved through the mist, stepping fully into your world with quiet inevitability. Your fingers curled tightly around the edge of the ring, grit biting into skin as the cold slowly burned through. The watcher's silhouette seemed to draw closer, blurred slightly by the mist and the fragile veil of daylight growing weak and thin. Your heart thrummed like a slow drum beneath taut ribs, each beat a countdown folded into the measured silence between breaths. And as the lifting fog began to fold back the night, a slow, deliberate pulse pressed against the edge of the air, the breath before the breaking wave, the tense prelude to the next motion of this unfolding dawn. The trial had begun, yet somewhere beyond the veil, beyond the trembling hush, you sense the faintest stir, something watching, waiting, patient as the river's endless murmur. The quiet folded over you again, deep and cold and waiting. The quiet lingered, long after the watcher's form slipped back into shadow, leaving silence heavier than before. You remain still, the rough fibers of the mawashi pressing insistently against your skin, like a whispered reminder of everything held in tension. Your breath caught, slow and steady, as the cold air crept into the depths of the training hall, curling softly around exposed flesh. Each inhale tasted faint, carbon and frost, mixed with the lingering sweetness of smoked tea that clung faintly to your tongue. Your feet traced a measured path toward the center of the ring, the worn wood cool beneath toes that barely stirred the dust, settled over countless mornings like this one. The rhythm of your heartbeat was a low drum echoing into the stillness, careful to avoid invading the space with haste or clamor. It was a sound you couldn't escape, one tethered tightly to your body's every subtle shift and controlled breath. Your fingertips lingered on the coarse edge of the ring, mapping ancient grooves with slow, deliberate pressure. Each scratch a testament to past struggles folded into the grain. The brittle light caught the dust motes floating in uneven shafts through cracked windows, silver fragments drifting without urgency. Outside, the mist wrapped the village in soft shrouds, their edges blurring into one another like pale watercolor strokes on muted canvas. A faint, distant crack resonated, a sharp fracture cutting clear through the measured quiet. Your muscles tensed, the cold catch of it settling beneath your ribs and twisting tight like a hidden thread pulled taut. The watcher's steady gaze flashed in your memory, silent and weighted as stone against flesh. You pulled again at the mawashi, the rough weave biting gently into skin, a fragile anchor in the gathering tension. The air stirred softly, a whispered breath brushing against your cheek like pine-scented mist, slipping through narrow frames. Between the faded banners and ancient beams, shadows folded in layers, thick and velvety in the slowing dawn. You moved with cautious certainty, each step weighted by history and the promise of the unknown pressing close. Your hands rose slowly in sweeping arcs, muscles flexing beneath taut skin, as your breath drew in, long and deliberate. The cold clung to the inside of your lungs, a crisp clarity that sharpened your senses against the haze. Every sound, a creak, the scrape of cloth, the subtle shift of wood beneath bare feet, measured like notes in a suspended song, waiting for the next quiet pulse. Through the misted windows, the village seemed held in suspended animation. The river's usual murmur was a faint thrum now, nearly swallowed by the fog that clung like ancient silence. The distant cry of a bird, thin and solitary, cracked the stillness briefly, a fragile thread unraveling the thick fabric of waiting. You paused, heart steady but alert, fingertips tracing the mawashi's coarse fibers again. Its texture was a wordless tether to countless dawns, to every breath held and released in this endless vigil. The watcher's presence, though unseen now, felt closer, as if the air between shadow and silence was drawn taut with their silent steps. Their eyes had held nothing but stillness and an unyielding gravity, a calm that was less absence and more a promise folded into the spaces you filled. You lowered your gaze briefly to the faded ring beneath your feet, the worn floorboards a chronicle written in grooves and scars, history folded beneath your soles. A soft rustle near the far corner of the hall drew your senses like a slow ripple in calm water. You shifted weight cautiously, muscles responding with ritual precision, senses opening to the faintest hints of movement. The watcher's form barely stirred in the dim, a shadow almost indistinguishable from the thickening mist that seeped under the doorframe and pooled along the floor. The rough warmth of old wood pressed against your hands once more as you gripped the edge of the training ring. Your breath, shallow and tightening, echoed the steady pulse slowing inside. Each exhale a careful release against rising anticipation. The cold air brushed soft fingers across your face, carrying the sharp scent of wood smoke mingling with frozen pine, an invisible whisper that teased the edges of your calm. You stepped forward then, each motion slow, every point of contact deliberate, the scrape of toe to floor, the quiet shift of weight, woven into a careful dance of endurance and quiet power. The ring around you was empty, yet full of countless echoes, the hollow sound, a muted heartbeat that connected past and present in untold resonance. You were alone, but tethered, anchored in ritual and readiness as the cold stretch of dawn pressed thin against your skin. The watcher's eyes returned to your mind, still, unreadable, but burning with quiet intent. Their presence was now a sharp breath against your own, a silent offering and challenge folded into the lingering fog. You met the invisible gaze with steady resolve, muscles poised beneath the snug grip of the mawashi, the rough fabric a chain and shield entwined around your waist. The room seemed to tilt slightly on the fragile cusp between one breath and the next. Outside, a newly birthed light crept from the west, pale and growing, filling cracks in the shadows with tentative hope. Yet beneath the slow creeping dawn lay something taut, a tension folded into the fabric of air itself, thickening with every heartbeat. Suddenly, a faint vibration shivered in the wood beneath your feet, a near imperceptible tremor that stirred the silence and sent a thin, crackling echo through the hall. It was the breaking ice of a hidden current, the cold snap of fate beginning to fracture time's fragile surface. Your pulse quickened, tethered tightly to breath held low in your chest. You lifted your head, eyes cutting through the fog and shadow toward the far side of the hall where the watcher had stood. But now the space was empty, only the lingering trace of their presence hanging like a breath caught in suspended time. The moment stretched then, breath held between the crack of day and shadow's final retreat. And as the soft blue light spilled across the wooden floorboards, tracing slow, deliberate lines of ancient resolve, you felt it, settle deep in your bones. The trial was no longer waiting just beyond the dawn. It was breathing in the quiet beside you. The air finally loosened its heavy hold, the pressure easing from your chest, as dawn unfolded around you in gentle strokes of pale light. The watcher's shadow had receded into the woven folds of mist and memory, leaving behind a quiet dignity that lingered faintly like the soft scent of pine smoke in the air. You remained silently centered, fingers lightly grazing the mawashi one last time, the rough threads now feeling less like a binding and more like a comfort. Tapestry woven from the countless mornings that had led you here. The worn floor beneath your bare feet no longer whispered tension, but settled into familiar rhythm, steady and accepting. The faint creak of ancient beams morphed into a quiet lullaby, harmonizing with the distant murmur of the river, which had resumed its patient song, threading like a silver ribbon through the valley shrouded in lifting fog. The village, too, began to stir softly, shutters parting with slow grace, lanterns flickering awake, and the delicate rustle of bamboo leaves hinting at a gentle breeze returning to life. Your breath deepened, drawing in the crisp air with a newfound ease. The cold that had bitten sharp against your skin softened into a calm embrace, and you felt the tight coil of anticipation unwind. Every muscle released its taut tension, folding softly into the quiet strength built from years of relentless mornings spent in this very hall. As you took your first deliberate steps beyond the ring, the weight of the trial shifted from looming presence to a quiet spark nestled deep inside. It was neither vanquished nor forgotten, but transformed, integrated into the unfolding story of your resolve and endurance. The persistent chill of dawn was replaced by a subtle warmth that coursed slowly through you like the first flush of spring beneath thawing earth. Outside, the village breathed anew. Distant voices hummed in muted choruses, and the faint, distant bark of dogs wove back subtly into the soundscape. The ephemeral silence that had held sway was now a gentle foundation, a sacred pause marking the passage from trial to continuation. The banners hanging on the walls, once faded and worn, seemed to catch the sunlight, their colors quietly blooming in the soft light as if whispering encouragement to all who passed beneath. You paused near the low beam where the watcher had last been seen, fingertips resting lightly on the smooth wood. Instead of shadows, you found a calm stillness, as if those silent eyes had infused the space with peace instead of challenge. The watcher's presence, once spectral and heavy, now felt like a steady pulse beneath the surface of your own heartbeat, a subtle reminder that trials are but the turning of a page, not an end in themselves. The delicate scent of smoked tea, mingled with fresh pine, and the faint touch of earth after rain, flowing through the open windows like a cleansing breath. It wrapped gently around your senses, drawing you into the moment's soft embrace. Time seemed to unfurl here. Sun, like tiny lanterns guiding you toward a quiet horizon. The old wood, once echoing with weighty footsteps and silent resolve, now sang a softer song, one of endurance met, of quiet triumph folded into the fabric of everyday life. With each inhale, you felt the slow release of shadows gathered deep inside. The heaviness that had clung like winter frost melted away beneath a warming certainty. The trial's specter was not a bar to your journey, but a shaping presence, a chapter closing with grace rather than thunder. In this stillness, the journey did not end. It folded gently forward, continuing beyond sight, past the mist, and into the soft glow of what waits just beyond waking. Your feet found the worn center of the ring once more, but now with calm settled deep. The rough grain beneath your skin grounded you, each scar and groove a testament, not to fear, but to steadiness endured. Your fingers traced familiar patterns in the air, movements slow and sure, rituals both learned and earned. Beyond you, the watcher's imprint lingered like a whisper, an invisible thread connecting you to all who stood here before, and all who would come after. The village's heartbeat grew steady, low murmurs folding into the gentle cadence of life's return. The frost melting from the window panes caught the morning light, fracturing and scattering it like scattered dreams made tangible. Outside, the river's song had grown stronger, carrying the promise of days yet unseen, threading endlessly through the quiet valley cradled by mist and memory. You closed your eyes briefly, the cool air brushing softly against your skin, carrying the delicate closeness of dawn. In that breath, you felt the full circle of the morning, its silence, its waiting, and now its gentle release. The weight of what had come passed into calm, and beyond that calm, the steady pulse of hope, steady and sure. The hall exhaled with you, the shadows melting fully into light. The mawashi, once rough and demanding, now softened under your touch as a quiet companion, marking the end of this vigil. The trial had come, and you had met it, not with clamor or fear, but with stillness and quiet resolve. And so, as the sun's first full light spilled golden over the village rooftops, a peaceful silence settled wrapped in the soft warmth of daybreak. The story found its rest in this gentle unfolding, an invitation to close your eyes and drift free, carried on the slow, unending rhythm of the world's breath. The trial has passed through, and now, in the hush of dawn fully broken, you are free to simply be. Rest well.